My name is Dana Whitmore, and the first time my ex-husband called me backwoods charity in front of his new wife, I was 3 months away from being promoted to lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force. I was 42 years old, standing in the parking lot of an Applebee's in Boise, Idaho, watching him introduce his fiancée to our daughter. Our daughter Lydia, 16, stood there with her arms folded, her face balancing pity and embarrassment, as Graham told her that I came from nothing and never quite figured out how to be someone. "Your mom tried," he said, resting his hand on Lydia's shoulder. "She just didn't have the right upbringing for success. You know. But hey, she's doing okay for someone who grew up in a cabin with no plumbing." His fiancée, Crystal, 29, blonde and polished, wearing a tailored coat that probably cost more than my first car, smiled that small, pitying smile. The kind you give the help when they bring your wine too slowly. I smiled back, said nothing, took Lydia to my car. "Mom," she asked as I pulled out of the parking lot, "why don't you ever say something, you just let him talk?" "Because I said some things don't need saying." She didn't understand. She couldn't. She'd grown up in Graham's world. The mountain house, the ski vacations, the spotless prep school hallways where no one ever had to check the balance before swiping a card. She didn't know where I came from. Not really. And Graham made sure she'd never forget that he was the one who had lifted me up. I did grow up poor, not in a trailer park, but in a logging town outside Coeur d'Alene, where most families worked the mills or cleaned cabins for tourists. My mother was a waitress. My father was gone before I started kindergarten. I wore hand-me-down jeans, ate school lunch for free, and learned early that people judge you by your zip code before they ever ask your name. But I was smart, determined. Grades were my ticket out, and I guarded them like oxygen. I earned a scholarship to Boise State, the first in my family to step onto a college campus. I met Graham my sophomore year. He was studying architecture, the son of a developer whose name was printed on half the buildings downtown. He thought I was grounded. I thought he was my escape. We married when I was 23. I dropped out to work 2 jobs while he finished grad school. By the time Lydia was born, I was 25 with a baby, a rent bill, and a husband who'd started looking at me like a favor he'd outgrown. The divorce came fast. The silence after it lasted longer. He got primary custody because he had the stability, the Mountain View house, the architecture firm, the polite reputation. I got every other weekend and a child support check that barely covered Lydia's prep school fees. His attorney, a man who wore empathy like cologne, made sure to emphasize my unfinished degree and lack of long-term earning potential. I signed the papers, took the settlement, and did something no one, least of all Graham, expected. I went back to school nights while working full-time, finished my degree through the Air Force Education Program, and started applying for officer training school. Technically, I commissioned. The U.S. Air Force took me in at age 30, old by most standards determined by mine. They didn't care that I hadn't followed a perfect path. They cared that I'd earned my degree, proven my grit, and shown I could lead, endure, and deliver. Turns out, I could. I went through officer training school and earned my silver bar as a second lieutenant. My assignment was logistics and resource operations, making sure entire squadrons had what they needed when they needed it. And I was good at it. Better than good. I understood pressure. I understood systems and scarcity and how to make order out of chaos. That's what growing up poor teaches you. By 32, I was a first lieutenant. At 35, a captain. By 39, a major with 2 overseas deployments under my belt. And through it all, Graham didn't have a clue. He thought I was some mid-level administrative clerk. I'd tried explaining once the difference between an enlisted airman and a commissioned officer, between a major and a private. He'd waved it off. "It's all just military stuff, right? Hey, at least it's steady pay." Lydia knew more, of course. She saw me in uniform sometimes. She'd hug me goodbye at the airport, then go back to her father's world of perfect lawns and polished friends who thought service meant charity auctions. By 14, she'd started to shift. Not cruel, just distant. Her tone softened into that mix of affection and mild embarrassment, the kind you reserve for a relative who never quite fits the mold. Graham fed that gently. Your mom's doing her best. Your mom wouldn't get this restaurant. Your mom's life is different. He remarried when Lydia turned 15. Crystal, the new wife, was everything I wasn't: young, polished, a degree from the University of Washington, perfect hair in every photo. She posted family pictures online and called Lydia our girl. I told myself I didn't care. I had my own path, my own rank, my own rebuilt life. But it still stung every time Lydia rolled her eyes at my old Subaru instead of her dad's Audi, every time she compared my modest condo to his view of the lake. Because no matter how far I'd climbed, part of her still saw the woman her father once called backwoods charity. It hurt every time Graham made one of his quiet little digs, the kind that sounded like jokes, but landed like verdicts. Not everyone's cut out for high-pressure careers, Dana. He'd say it in front of Lydia as if ambition were a language I'd never learned to speak. Then last October, everything changed. The email came on a Tuesday morning while I was at Mountain Home Air Force Base, Idaho. Promotion board results. I opened it, read the words twice, and just sat there. Selected for promotion, Lieutenant Colonel '05. For a second the air went still. Then I cried, the kind of cry that isn't about sadness or shock, but recognition. I'd done it. The woman from a forgotten logging town in northern Idaho had made lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force. The ceremony was scheduled for January, 3 months away. I called Lydia, hoping to share the news. "That's awesome, Mom," she said, distracted. "Can I call you back? Dad's grilling steaks." "Sure," I said. She didn't. For a moment I thought about calling Graham. Maybe he'd finally understand what it meant: the command authority, the weight of the silver oak leaf. But I'd spent 12 years trying to explain things to him. So I didn't. When the day came, a Friday morning in January, the base auditorium was bright, with blue banners and brass insignia. I'd invited Lydia, told her it mattered. She said she'd try. She had a fitting that day with Crystal shopping for some charity gala her father's firm was sponsoring. "Can't you reschedule?" I'd asked. "Mom, it's just a work thing, right? You've had promotions before. This one's different," I said. "I'll try." She didn't come. Neither did Graham. I hadn't invited him, but part of me had hoped she'd mention it, that maybe he'd want to see what I'd become. But why would he? In his world, I was still the small-town girl who got lucky in uniform. My mother came, though. Drove 5 hours from Coeur d'Alene in her church dress and polished shoes. Sat front row, cried the whole time. When my wing commander pinned the silver oak leaf onto my shoulder, I looked out at the room, at the airmen I'd led, the officers who knew my story. "I grew up in a logging town," I said. "My mom waited tables. I wore hand-me-downs. I joined the Air Force for a paycheck and health insurance." The room fell quiet. 20 years later, I stand here as a lieutenant colonel. Remember this: where you start is just geography. It's not destiny. If Dana's journey moved you from the girl who started with nothing to the officer who stood for everything, don't forget to subscribe and stay with her story. The next chapter begins where courage meets confrontation. The only person who gets to decide your worth is you. The room erupted in applause. I wasn't used to that kind of sound, pure pride without pity, but it hit me straight in the chest. After the ceremony, my wing commander pulled me aside. "Whitmore, we're rotating a team to Al Udeid Air Base, Qatar that spring. I want you as my executive officer." Interested executive officer. Second in command of a maintenance and logistics wing, nearly 900 airmen. "Yes, sir," I said, steady, but lit inside. I didn't tell Graham about the deployment. I didn't tell Lydia either. Not right away. Then in February, Lydia's school held a career day. Parents were invited to speak about their work. She asked her father first. He had client meetings. She asked Crystal next. There was some charity brunch conflict. Finally, reluctantly, she called me. "What would I even say?" she asked. "That my mom's in the military? You could, I said. Or you could say, your mom's a lieutenant colonel who's about to deploy as an executive officer for a wing in the Middle East. Silence. Then, what does that even mean? It means, I said, I'm second in command of almost 900 airmen. It means I manage operations that keep aircraft flying and people alive. It means I'm responsible for millions of dollars worth of equipment and for every person who depends on it. There was a long pause on the line. Oh, she said finally. I didn't know you did all that. I thought you just worked in an office. I do, I said smiling, when I'm not in the field, or deployed, or training, or leading. Another pause. Then softly, will you come to career day? Yeah. I showed up in my Air Force Service Blues deep navy jacket, silver oak leaf glinting on my shoulders, ribbons lined in quiet order. When I walked into the classroom, Lydia's eyes widened. Mom, she whispered. You look professional, I offered. Powerful, she said. I gave my talk about Air Force logistics, how we keep missions moving, how leadership means making decisions that ripple across the world. The kids asked questions about deployments, about courage, about fear. When I finished, the teacher shook my hand. Lieutenant Colonel Whitmore, thank you. That was remarkable. Lydia stood beside me, chin-high pride softening her voice. I'm proud of my mom, she said, and I believed her. That weekend was supposed to be her dad's, but she asked to stay with me instead. I want to hear more, she said, about what you really do. We sat in my apartment, the same modest two-bedroom I'd rented near Boise with secondhand furniture and the hum of an old heater that sounded like memory. Lydia had always seemed a little embarrassed by the place, but that night, she listened. I told her about officer training school, my first deployment to Afghanistan, the years I'd spent learning logistics under pressure. About earning captain then major, and now lieutenant colonel. About the wing I'd be deploying with in just under 3 weeks. Why didn't you tell me all this before, she asked. I tried, I said gently. But you weren't really interested. And your dad? He didn't think it mattered. She hesitated. He doesn't know, does he? About your rank, about what you actually do? No, I said. Can I tell him if you want to? She must have. Because a week later my phone rang. Dana Graham said, his tone clipped. Lydia says you're a lieutenant colonel. No greeting. Just that. Yes, I said. Since when? January. And you're deploying when in 2 weeks? Qatar. 9 months. Silence. Then, why didn't you tell me, Graham? I said, I've been in the Air Force for 12 years. I've tried to tell you about my career. You've never been interested. I didn't realize you were. I thought you were enlisted. Some kind of clerk or tech sergeant. I'm an officer, I said evenly. I've been one since I was 30. I've commanded teams, briefed generals, and earned every stripe on this uniform. More silence. Then softer. I didn't know. I know, I said. He cleared his throat. Lydia wants to have a dinner. Before you leave. Me, her, and Crystal. She said we should acknowledge it properly. Okay, I said. We met at a restaurant downtown, white tablecloths, soft light, and a wine list that looked longer than my deployment orders. I wore my dress blues. Lydia had asked me to. Graham and Crystal were already seated when I arrived. He stood when he saw me, eyes catching on the insignia on my shoulders. Jesus, Dana, he said. I smiled faintly. Hi, Graham. Crystal. Crystal's gaze moved over the medals, the ribbons, the silver oak leaf. You're really a lieutenant colonel. Yes, I said. And you're deploying in 10 days. Lydia arrived a few minutes later and hugged me tight. You look amazing, Mom. We ordered, talked, laughed nervously. Then Graham looked down at his hands. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I waited. I've spent years underestimating you, making you feel small. I told myself it was because you didn't finish college, because you weren't Us. But it was me. I wasn't enough. He looked up then, and for the first time in years there was no arrogance, just regret. But the truth is, Graham said quietly, I was the one who wasn't enough. He looked at me across the table, eyes finally stripped of ego. You built a career from nothing. You earned respect. You became someone. And I was so busy looking down on you that I missed watching you become extraordinary. Crystal said nothing. Her hands folded neatly in her lap. Lydia watched me holding her breath. I forgive you, I said. Graham blinked, startled. Just like that? Just like that, I replied. Because I don't need your approval anymore. I don't need you to see my worth. I already know it. He nodded slowly, the kind of nod that carried years of unspoken things. Lydia's lucky to have you as her mother. I know, I said, smiling softly. We finished dinner quietly. Graham paid, insisted on it. Outside, the air was cool, the streetlights painting everything in soft amber. As we reached the parking lot, he stopped me. When you get back, he said, from Qatar, can we try again? Not as us, but as parents. Respectful ones this time. Yes, I said. I'd like that. 3 weeks later, I deployed. Lydia cried at the airport. Graham stood beside her, holding her shoulders like she might fall apart. Be safe, he said. I will. He hesitated, then added, and Dana, thank you. For everything you've done for our daughter, for your country, for proving me wrong. I smiled. You're welcome. Now, 4 months into the deployment, I'm writing this from Al Udeid Air Base, under a sky that never really turns black. I'm the executive officer of a logistics wing overseeing operations across 3 countries. Every decision I make ripples through hundreds of lives. I brief colonels, sometimes generals, sometimes it still feels surreal. Lydia emails me every day. She started researching ROTC programs, talking about leadership purpose, the meaning of service. Graham sends care packages, practical things, small comforts. It's his quiet way of apologizing. And my mother, the woman who waited tables, who scraped and prayed and never stopped believing, she clips every article that mentions our unit. She called me last week. I'm proud of you, baby, she said. I know, Mama, I told her. I know. I'm 42 years old, a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force. I grew up in a logging town with nothing but grit. Now I command airmen across continents. The people who once said I'd never become anything, they were wrong. Not because I proved them wrong, but because I stopped letting them define me. I define myself. And that I've learned is the only victory that ever mattered. I've learned that strength doesn't come from medals or titles. It comes from standing tall when no one believes you can. If my story spoke to something inside you, tell me what part of it you felt most. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, your own moments of fighting to be seen. I want to hear from you. And if there's one thing I'd ask you to remember, it's this: never let anyone else measure your worth. Define yourself no matter how long it takes. Subscribe. Stay with me, and let's keep walking forward together.